There isn't many game sequels that get sub-serious of a sequel and still remains great, but that's exactly what Capcom's 1993 release of Super Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers is. Absolute one-on-one beat-em-up game in perfection. The absolute pinnacle of what a game in this genre should be. So why not just call these sub-series of Street Fighter 2 something else different entirely? These do get a little confusing over time, right? Now, the way I look at these games, which are put together from the source game being 1991 Street Fighter 2, is pretty much down to refining the original game. Updates or DLC in today's world would be a good way to look at these. This game is the fourth title in this sub-series, and it is the next game to be released after 1992 Street Fighter 2 Turbo. So, what are the additions to this game then? Well, like I just said, take a look at this game as a major update which refines the existing characters and improves the in-game fighting mechanics, so everything is so much tighter than the previous installment. This is also using the famous Capcom CPS2 hardware, meaning that the graphics and audio have both had upgrades too. We also have a few new characters added in this game, which is why I talked about the DLC just a minute ago. The new characters here are Cammy, DJ, Fei Long and T-Hawk. Cammy in particular is a great new character to play as and definitely a welcome addition, whereas Fei Long is more or less a Bruce Lee style character. We also have a few new backdrops too, which are also nice to see, and these new backdrops of course accompanies the new characters in this game. We also get various other upgrades too, such as the combo scoring system, as well as a brand new and fresh looking HUD, which made everything look a little more modern for its time. And comparing this with Street Fighter 2, which I've also previously covered in this arcade port series, as well as the original Street Fighter game from 1987, then yes, the New Challengers is a significant game that modernised many things for a new generation at the time. So today there are several home conversions of this much loved beat 'em up game to go through. So let's rank from worst to best the very best home conversion that you could have had of Capcom's 1993 classic Super Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers. Now, although this game certainly doesn't look great, as an Amiga fan myself and having covered two other Amiga Street Fighter games in this series, then this is probably the best Street Fighter game on this platform, and considering that US school to release this is quite an achievement to have a fairly playable version too. It released in 1995, at which point many Amiga users were well into the 32-bit console generation, so many likely would have missed this altogether. But if like myself you had an Amiga, you were most likely fairly chuffed with this home conversion. I remember personally buying this brand new from Electronics Boutique, and this would have been one of the very last Amiga games sold commercially. I do, however, remember not playing this game too much as it was a little annoying in terms of loading. I played this on the Amiga 500 at the time, and having 7 floppy disks was a little overkill. If only I owned 6 external drives at the time, then things would have been a little better with this game. So what we have here is of course an extremely cut down version of the game, but really what do you expect? If you was playing this like myself on the Amiga 500, you were effectively trying to run a CPS2 game on an 8-year-old computer. But at this day and age, we've got WHD load, and running this through emulator or even using WHD load on real hardware is a breeze, and it also means that we're not going to run into a corrupt floppy disk, which is going to ruin the whole game. The opening of the game doesn't actually look that bad. The animation of Ryu pulls it off very good. Sure, there is no sound here, but it gets the job done nevertheless. The main game screen menu gives us options in which we can lower or heighten the game's difficulty level. We also get a choice of music or just sound effects. I opted for music and was only expecting music during gameplay. What I actually got though was sound effects as well as music. However, there are sound effects missing though, such as the final win where another fighter or yourself lets off his or her last agonizing sound before dropping to the ground. As you can see, I play this Cammy as she is my personal favourite character to play as within the new challengers, and she controls surprisingly well with just a D-pad and single fire button. It's just really a case of getting used to these controls. Sprite-wise, I mean, like I said, this is an old computer at this point of release, and this actually being a US Golden release, then everything looks surprisingly good for what it is compared to some of their other games. Don't expect parallax scrolling or even animated backgrounds though. What you see here is essentially two fighters that move, and that is it. We do get the combo scoring system appear though, which is pretty cool. I mean, like I said, this ain't a bad conversion, and I really can't criticise it too much for what it is. If I was to criticise anything, it would likely be the slight slowdowns that it gets from time to time. If there was ever a game that showed off the Amiga AGA capabilities against the older Amiga computers, then the new challengers for the Amiga 1200 was a good way to do this comparison. Right from the get-go, we have the opening of Ryo with his Hadouken blast, and this looks much more refined than that of the OCS and ECS Amiga versions. In fact, we even have sound effects to go with it here. And there's some nice touches with the options menu too. Dependent on the part of the world you lived in at the time, we have a POW as well as an NTS screen refresh option. You'll also notice with this AGA version that we don't have an option for music or sound effects. This version contains both automatically, and it really sounds like it too. It's awesome. From the character selection screen, we have the moving sound as we move around the grid to select a character, complete with music too. The OCS and ECS release just contain the music. You can also see by comparison that the selection screen in itself has been majorly upgraded here with much more defined boxes. This looks pretty slick. As we get into the game itself, the colours are much more vibrant and sprites seem much more defined. And hitting those enemies as well as enemies hitting you really sounds good. It's most definitely got that beefier arcade punch sound about it all. We even get the final sound of another fighter or yourself going down just as a round closes after a win. If you happen to have owned a Amiga CD32 controller at this time, this would have been even better as there's more buttons to use. I can safely say in terms of Street Fighter games for any Amiga system, then this AGA version, also by US Gold, likely would have been the definitive version to play. But again, just like the OCS and the ECS versions, this version released fairly late into the Amiga's life. I mean, by the time this released in 1995, Commodore itself had been out of business for around a year, but it just went to show how loved the Amiga was in its day. This version never had things like parallax scrolling either, but I will say it again, for those who know about bad US Gold games, then this game is pretty damn good, which also offers a fair challenge too. Both of these Amiga versions also contained very good hit collision detection. Now, I was really expecting FM Town's 1994 version to be a flawless conversion, and that's most definitely not to say it's a bad version, because it's actually very playable. Although, mainly within this arcade port series, I do tend to find the Japanese exclusive games to be a cut above most other versions. But like I said, I cannot really say that about the new challengers here. Firstly, this is a seriously time-consuming game to load, and considering this was produced on a CD and not a floppy disk, I might have expected loading time to be quicker, but this was slow. I actually had to use fast forward many times to speed up the loading times for this game. I was even surprised to find that after the versus screen appears, a load would then take place rather than going straight into fights. We are also missing some game modes too, which the next couple of versions have plenty of. What we get here is pretty much a straight up arcades game with some difficulty settings included. Now this version does undoubtedly feature some of the best reproduced music and sound effects, and that is simply because of its using of cue sounds. There are also animations in this FM Towns release which are missing too. A good example of this is Dolsim Stage in India. The next version features the elephant's trunks that moved around, but here most of those background animations are actually static. I also found that even used in the easiest difficulty settings, this game was extremely tough compared to most others in this video. Firstly, and sadly, I cannot get the sounds working for this MS-DOS version of the game, but judging from other videos on YouTube of this version, then I can safely say this is actually a really decent sounding game, and that depended of course on the type of sound card you were using. If you owned a higher end Sound Blaster type card, then this version was obviously a big upgrade from the Amiga games very easily, and it wasn't the only thing that received a major upgrade. This MS-DOS version was developed by a completely different team altogether. This is a Rosner Labs game, whereas the Amiga conversions was by Freestyle Software. Capcom even published this release, which proudly came to DOS users for 1996. It goes without saying that the 1990s was a really good era for PC gaming. Games really did begin to come into their own at this point. Those bad arcade ports that DOS users seen throughout the 1980s was clearly coming to an end at this point. You'll notice that this game pretty much has the lot, from animated people standing in backgrounds, to waving arms around, to birds flying around in the background. This all looks great and adds that little more to the arcade experience at home. And Rosner Labs didn't stop with the background animations either. We have parallax scrolling here too, which gives the game that much more depth and introduces that pseudo 3D look about it. We also have breakable objects with this version too. You can see this in Guile's stage with the two breakable objects on the left and right hand sides. I mean, really, as far as these free computer versions of the new challengers go, this is the very best out there. The colours are also more accurate to the arcade game too. The action seems much more polished and it doesn't tend to drop in frame rates much either when the action gets heavy. The only possible criticism as such would likely be the size of the sprites. I mean, characters in the game itself do look fairly skimpy when compared to the arcade release and also particular console versions. But really, if you had this version and a decent sound card as well as some really good control pads, you were truly on a winner with this 1996 game. It doesn't matter which way around I place this Mega Drive version and the next version in this video, somebody out there will likely say I got it wrong. You were either Club Sega or Club Nintendo back in the day, so let me give you the reasonings behind putting this Mega Drive game here first. Well, firstly, and this cannot be denied, this 1994 release by Capcom doesn't sound too great, and that goes for the music and sound effects. This really does stand out from the moment the introduction begins, and sadly, more times than not, this Sega Megabit cartridge sounds very distorted. Although voice samples aren't bad at all, on the flip side, then this version compared to the next version offered brighter colours. But this all comes at a cost of having less visual effects happening here. For example, parallax scrolling and those little details like birds flying in the background aren't as prominent with this game. Although blood effects are here, and Sega never really did hold back from offending people this way. This awesome 16-bit Sega console release also had two exclusive modes thrown in, which were Battle Mode as well as the Score Challenge mode. This Mega Drive game is also slightly slower too in terms of frame rate compared to the next 16-bit console version in this video. So really, this is a case of swings and roundabouts with this release, and that is why I made the comment at the start of this version explaining that somebody will likely say I've got this wrong. All I say then is that I sincerely apologise for that. One last little annoying aspect of this version is that the stock Mega Drive controller that most people had back in the day only had 3 action buttons, which required players to press the start button in order to switch between kicks and punches. idea of emulating games from yesteryear on your modern day computer or portable device. Maybe you hate the thought of loading times of your favourite games and prefer to watch commentary videos or anything else retro related. Just Jamie Retro Realm is the ultimate channel for anybody who loves games from the golden age of arcade to home microcomputers as well as the console generations. From the 1970s to the 2000s, then this channel will have something that you'll love, including themed video series as well as beginner's guides from standalone emulators to more complex front-end emulation system guides. This channel even supports and showcases modern day games for retro platforms, or more commonly known as homebrew games, as well as offering reviews for physical hardware. Just Jamie will absolutely have something for any preference, and the video uploads are also very frequent too. So if you want a retro gaming channel which appreciates everything from the Sinclair ZX80 to the modern day era arcade games and love the idea of discovering new games from yesteryear, hit subscribe and set notifications so you don't miss out on almost daily content. Of course, the next version had to be for the Super Nintendo. I mean, which other console rival was there in the west of the world during this 16-bit era? The school playground argument was mainly Sega versus Nintendo, and surprisingly and really awfully, that school argument still exists today in some cases. So then, why did I decide with this version over the Mega Drive version? Firstly then, the sound is superior. It sounds much more like the arcade game, and hitting other enemies and vice versa sounds very beefy and chunky here. That tinny and distorted sound that Sega's 16-bit console had isn't here at all. This sounds very premium, in other words. Sadly though, the accurate arcade music and sound effects is let down by the less convincing sound samples. Now, like I said, the Mega Drive game is known to be slightly slower in terms of frame rates. However, this is the faster version, and it really does show when I come face to face with Fei Long. This particular background and fight tends to drop in frame rates in most versions I've covered so far in this video. However, here with this 1994 Capcom release, this isn't really too noticeable. It runs fairly perfect here if comparing them side to side. A really good feature with the stock Super Nintendo controller though is that we have more action buttons. 4 buttons as well as the shoulder buttons. This means that using a particular button to switch between punches and kicks isn't necessary here, and it performs that much better for it when playing the game. We pretty much get what we really want here, plus a couple of other game modes, but we of course don't get what Sega users had with 2 particular exclusive modes. Finally, and this goes without saying, this is obviously a 90s Nintendo game, and so blood had been completely censored out of this version, which isn't really a massive deal, so to speak. I mean, it's not really like Street Fighter was ever known to have excessive amounts of blood like Mortal Kombat had. All in all, it is a case of swings and roundabouts with both of these 16-bit console versions. The boss of a local music shop that I buy my vinyl records from watched my Pac-Lan Ports video a little while back, and he was truly blown away with how well it looked and performed on the Japanese computer, the Sharp X68000. Sure, this machine was responsible for the development of some CPS-1 games, but others had other development teams. The Sharp X68000 was a beast of a system, and this port of the new Challengers truly shows it in a big way. This was jointly developed by SPS and Capcom and released for extremely lucky Japanese fans of Street Fighter in 1994. Sure, this masterpiece of a port did come with 6 floppy disks originally, but considering how close to arcade perfection this version was, I am fairly confident to say that most would have let this slide. This is running perfectly for 4MB X68000 machines, so you would need an upgrade to run this version if you had less than that. I will always say that previously, whenever I've mentioned Sharp X68000 machines, a couple of people will say that it's not fair, as Britain or America, for example, likely did not own one of these computers in the day. I'd just like to say again that as well as having Japanese subscribers, we cannot discredit it or not even include this version, because this version did exist and many people outside of Japan could easily acquire one of these machines these days, if you have a lot of money to spare, that is. And if you thought the Amiga 1200 cost a lot of money, you haven't seen nothing yet. I'll be honest, I actually thought this version was better than the original arcade game itself. It just seemed that much smoother to play, and the visuals just seemed to pop out that little much more. Just like every other system that the new Challengers was ported for, this also of course had 2-player mode as well as having a string of other options such as difficulty settings. And what's even more awesome is that Capcom released an arcade stick for this version at the time. This truly was the arcade at home, and those credit card sized emulation machines that scammers are selling these days simply didn't exist back in 1994. Super Street Fighter 2, the new Challengers, have seen emulated versions in recent years from the PlayStation 4 to Switch, but I won't be mentioning these or the 32-bit console era compilations of Street Fighter, as again, these by the seams of it weren't developed specifically for those machines, but they were just emulated ports. Anyways, that is it for ranking every new Challengers port today. Did you necessarily agree with my choices in today's video? I'll also remind you not to squabble over the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo versions. I know how easily this is done. I do read the comments. Anyways, if you're new to this channel and you want to catch up with all of the arcade ports videos that I've covered so far in this series, I'll leave a link in the comments section for you to check those out. But again, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay retro.